Welcome to another fun discussion. We are the Brothers Mahoney. I am Michael.
And I'm James.
And today we are discussing the 8th Big Finish audio drama release being Rad Down, which was written by Justin Richards, who also brought us Whispers of Terror, one that we have spoken about previously, and was released May 2000, running for about an hour and 26 minutes or so, which is the shortest Big Finish audio drama that we've listened to so far, out of the 8 that we've now listened to.
This one is the first one that we've listened to that has the plasters of the Fifth Doctor, which we've had before, but with the companion being Peri, who, of course, the Fifth Doctor met in his second to last story in the classic Who, Planet of Fire, which was, of course, the last story with Tolo in it. Now, as any fan of the classic series knows, the very next story was, his last, The Case of Androzani, a very rather amazing Fifth Doctor story, by all accounts considered one of the best stories from classic Who by a lot of people, at least in the top 5. But that means that the Fifth Doctor on TV only got 2 stories with Peri as a companion, which is why things like Big Finish are so fun, and of course books, which we'll discuss a bit later. But the Fifth Doctor's motherboard audio dramas from Big Finish with Peri. They do throw in another companion, some Egyptian woman, I believe. I don't really, we haven't listened to them, so I don't know much about her. But so the Fifth Doctor actually has tons of extra stories with Peri that you'd never have guessed if you just watched the show. And that's where I think the joys of Big Finish are. They can fill in, not gaps, because if you just watch Planet of Fire into Case of Androzani, you wouldn't think there was a gap. But the universe is large for Doctor Who. And apparently there was a gap. And so Big Finish is there to help throw in, 30 stories in between those two. Maybe not that many, but there is a lot. But Rad Down is the first, and also is the reappearance of the Ice Warriors, who were last seen in Doctor Who in the Monster of Paladin, Michael?
I believe so, yeah. The Ice Warriors is one of those antagonists. Well, even calling them antagonists is a bit strong. They're antagonists for a couple of the stories, being naturally the Ice Warriors and Seeds of Death, both Patrick Troughton's Second Doctor stories, but they also popped up in both Curse of Paladin and Monster of Paladin, John Pertwee's stories, and they just never popped up again throughout all of Tom Baker's time. Anyone past that point just never popped up again. So it's just one of those sort of strange examples. Ideally, we'll be seeing much the same thing coming up with the Celestial Toymaker, where they haven't appeared since the First Doctor's time.
Well, they appeared in some books.
Well, sure, but I mean, same thing with the Great Intelligence. Appeared a couple of times in Patrick Troughton's stories, and then of course pops up again in Matt Smith. So it's always interesting to see which antagonists come where. And I do find it somewhat strange that the Ice Warriors did appear past John Pertwee's time. I almost wonder if maybe the Centaurans went to use it sort of as a replacement.
I mean, the Centaurans are only used, 4 times in the classic Who anyway?
Sure, but they sort of popped up. I guess technically Monster of Paladin came out after Time Warrior.
Yeah.
But I sort of wonder if the whole honorable warrior type thing is sort of taken over by the Centaurans as opposed to bringing the Ice Warriors back. Maybe they're simply to do costuming.
But I mean, that's probably true, but I don't even see the Centaurans as really honorable warriors. They're just warriors. They don't seem to care as much about the honor part. The Ice Warriors are really big into it, which you can really tell from this story.
Yeah, it's probably too. It's so nice to see the Ice Warriors again, and it's not a secret either. There's no spoilers here. Because the Ice Warriors literally on the cover of the release, so it's classy.
It is indeed classy. It's, kind of a simple cover, but it tells you all you need to know. So the plot of this story, straight from Big Finish, is as follows. Ares 1, NASA's first manned mission to the dead planet Mars. Whereas Mars is dead as it seems? While the NASA team investigate an anomaly on the planet's surface, the Doctor and Peri find themselves inside a strange alien building. What is its purpose? And what is frozen inside the blocks of ice that guard the doorways? If the Doctor has a sense of deja vu, it's because he's about to meet some old adversaries, as well as some new ones. Which, while true, the Ice Warriors really, in the end, weren't the antagonistic force in this story.
And it's been played with before, because in Curse of Paladin, which is a very enjoyable Third Doctor story, there is an Ice Warrior in the story who some people think is the antagonist. And I should say some people in universe believe to be the antagonist, but that may or may not be a case.
Mostly because the Doctor, they did this every now and then, they stopped doing it for a while, but the Doctor, could sometimes be wrong about people, and, that was actually kind of an arc he went through for a story.
So the idea that in this story, the main antagonist isn't an ice warrior, despite what some people might think, but one of the astronauts. I don't know, it sort of adds something not unexpected, but something a little nice, a little different. It's not like necessarily stereotypical.
This is true. I do have to say, if there's any alien species they would do this with, it would be the Ice Warriors, because they wouldn't pour this with a Dalek. They probably wouldn't pour it with a Cyberman. I mean, there might be a random story out there where like these creatures appear, but they aren't the main antagonist. But those are always antagonistic forces. Even Centaurans, you probably couldn't show us, oh, they aren't really the bad ones here, because they are pretty militaristic. But the Ice Warriors, you actually can do that because they do have a code of honor, which means in the best of times they don't have to be the enemy.
Yeah, and that code of honor also plays a decent part in this story. In fact, one of the characters is a ice warrior named Lord Zal, which is Zzaal. It's a nice name.
Yeah, I'm going to name my son Zal.
Zal Mahoney. It does sound good. It's Celtic. Lord Zal has a really good quote that I actually wrote out, which goes, "There is honor in being merciful. There is dignity in forgiveness, just as it is noble to exact revenge." So it just goes to show that the code of the Ice Warriors is very deeply embedded in their culture. And in fact, the whole reason they ran into these Ice Warriors, they're sort of standing guard of a tomb of a very well-known Ice Warrior. So again, standing guard, it seems another element of the sort of honorable ideas that the Ice Warriors generally stand for.
Yeah, and not only standing guard, but like they're there, long after the guy's died, they're just guarding over his tomb.
Yeah, which is a nice sign of respect too.
Granted, they are frozen blocks of ice, of course, so it's not like it's hard for them. But nonetheless,
yeah, luckily they did not stay frozen.
No, the end of was episode 1 where they get unfrozen. Yeah, this story to me was rather easy going. It had a very nice opening that was just you get into really quickly. There are 4 astronauts coming on a manned flight to Mars, and the Doctor and Peri land in this random building. And so it goes from there. Eventually they meet up, and it's just, there's not too many characters. Yeah, there are some secrets, some hints of things that we don't get to learn about. And there's probably like 3, not twists, but 3 things that happen throughout the story that are set up in the very first episode. And so that's fun. But I mean, overall, this is one of the most simple ones, but that's not to say it's one of the bad ones. It's actually so far it's been one of the better ones I've listened to, just because I don't know how nice it was, how easy it was to listen to.
And I think there are 2 reasons for that. I mean, one, it's a 5th Doctor story. The 5th Doctor is one of the more personable, nice, sort of easygoing Doctors. He can generally get along with anyone. He's not very aggro, as the kids say.
This is very true.
And 2, it's like James said, or maybe I said it, I can't tell anymore. It's one of the shorter ones. It's only an hour 26 minutes. So it's a easier story to get into. I mean, sure, you have some characters and names you have to know, but it has a pretty easygoing setup. And I don't think I enjoyed it quite as much as James did, but it had a nice sort of cozy feel to it. And also it's sort of a nice 80s vibe going, because some of the music throughout this story, and I think the music was composed by Russell Stone. Some of the music was pretty nice, had sort of almost an 80s synth vibe-ish type style for it, and it just added to, in my opinion, like the atmosphere. A lot of the music in Big Finish has been decent, but I think this music, more than most of the other stories that we've listened to, has stood out the most to me.
Yeah, the music really just jumped out to me whenever it was playing. It was just as Michael said, it's really nice and synthy, and I just really enjoyed it. I thought it was a very good soundtrack.
Yeah, and like I said, there's not that many cast members here, but there are a couple of names that we should know. One of the antagonists in the story is a guy named Paul Webster, who is voiced by Stephen Fewell. Now, the character was sort of insufferable. I couldn't stand the character, but it's pretty good voice performance.
Yeah, he was one of those, honestly, a bit generic. Admittedly, I couldn't tell you he's going to be the main antagonist for the first story, but very quickly it becomes obvious. Okay, yeah, he's the bad force here.
It's like the more he talks, the more
obvious he gets.
Yeah, like they got very few points that I'd consider good going for him. There is a somewhat mysterious, I believe it's a niece, a Tanya Webster, who is voiced by Georgia Moffat, which might be to some a familiar name.
Yes, she, of course, married David Tennant, who of course played the 10th Doctor. And also, not only is she the daughter of Peter Davison, which is our Radio Fun connection, who of course is this 5th Doctor, but she played Johnny, the Doctor's daughter, from, well, the episode of Doctor's Daughter, which honestly isn't that great, but has some fun things in there I've always liked. So I've always given it a bit of a pass, even though parts of it bother me. Especially since she appears at the end, she's alive, and yeah, like we never see anything from her again except in comic books. Well, maybe she's sort of been in audio, but I know she's sort of in some comics.
Yeah, I was gonna say I could have sworn she was in audio, but I may be mistaken.
Oh, she probably is. I don't know who could possibly have any idea of who's in what audios, because they have so many at this point.
There's also the voicing talents of Robert Jazik, who isn't a name I particularly know, but I do know that he goes on to voice a somewhat popular and one of the perhaps odder companions of a Doctor, being Frobisher.
Frobisher is one of those many companions who never appeared in the classic series, or, well, New Who. He is apparently a shape-shifting penguin. Or maybe, but more aptly, a shape-shifter who likes taking his main form as a penguin. I don't really know the specifics. I've never seen or heard the story with him. But he appeared in, was it the comic strips, or was it just... I guess it would have been the comic strips.
I think he initially appeared in the 6th Doctor comic strips and was later brought into audio, with, of course, Robert Jasek voicing him.
I know that the Holy Terror, which you're beginning to quasi-subtly is very well regarded by a lot of people. So that I think that'll be fascinating to listen to.
And then lastly, I think last voice actor of note, Matthew Brownhill, who voiced Lord Zal, being the hard hunter of the Ice Warriors. And I thought he was a pretty decent character, a little more depth than you might expect from some alien hombre. One of the last scenes he was in was, I wouldn't go as far to say as it was emotional, because I don't think it was particularly emotional, but I do think it had the potential to be quite emotional. I thought it was a pretty nice scene too. Certainly atmospheric.
Yeah, and again, the music was really nice during that scene as well.
I did like how one of the elements in this story, now we mentioned that Paul Webster is one of the antagonists, pretty much the main antagonist, and one of his qualities is that he wants to obtain and sell alien technology to a bunch of people. I think is his uncle or his father who's the rich guy.
I'm pretty sure his father funded the whole NASA flight in the first place, because his company had gotten some materials from space from this area. I don't know how they probably did some trajectory studies and figured out others from this area on Mars. And so they funded the flight with NASA with the prerequisite that his son, who is part of this sort of like raising red flags, part of the defense side of his corporation, because they sold weapons, and also would the term be niece?
Yeah, and that would of course be Tanner Webster, Georgia Moffat's character.
Yes.
And I think she said her character said she was only like 17 years old.
Yeah, 17. She was a geology student. So, I mean, there's enough plausibility for her to be on the flight.
No. If you're only 17 and being sent off to space, it must be nice you have a rich family.
It must be nice.
I just think it's a nice, it's not an uncommon element, but you see the type of greediness throughout classic Who, and it's just another example of rampant capitalism being one of the problems that a lot of people have to face. Like one of the main reasons of this conflict is this guy wants alien technology to make money off of.
And not only that, he wants to start a war between the humans and the Ice Warriors.
Yeah.
And then sell weapons to both sides, because they don't actually care about if the humans win or not. I mean, I'm sure they'll prefer it, but as long as they can make money selling to both sides, it works well for them. I mean, you see this in the Sandmakers. You see it in so many classic Who. Yeah, I guess the weapon Iron Mongers weren't, the part of the Sandmakers, but nonetheless, like rapid capitalism just, destroys whole civilizations. And science fiction likes exploring that in a lot of ways. And Doctor Who also has explored in a lot of ways. Even recently is with Oxygen, the 12th Doctor story from season 10.
Yeah, which is, in my opinion, one of the highlights. I think season 10 was, pretty sure it's Capaldi's strongest season. And Oxygen's, I think, one of the strongest episodes in this season.
I mean, it helps that ideologically we agree with what it's going for.
Related to Webster, though, is also sort of it's not meant to be funny, but I imagine how the Fifth Doctor is sort of an easygoing personality due to Paul Webster's actions in the story when he sort of outright attacks a peaceful alien species. The Fifth Doctor suggests that he face the human justice system as opposed to, of course, the justice the Ice Warriors might want to dispense.
Yeah, I mean, this is a joke in about 4,000 different ways. Because anybody, who lives on planet Earth knows the human justice system sucks. One, he's the son of a rich man. He's not going to face justice. We had talked about this type of thing. Oh, which story was it? Oh, in Dalek with Rose, where just killing somebody, that's just wrong. On the face of it. No matter what the person did, it's just wrong to kill them if it's not in self-defense. No son of a rich person is going to face. I don't know what I guess maybe the justice system is perfect on Earth during this time period, which they never really did say. It's the first man mission to Mars, so I guess we could use other stories to try to extrapolate the date. But I have a feeling it's not a perfect justice system. This is probably years and years later, but we send the mutants, when the planet was dying, basically, what the colonists were like with the one insane commando. So I don't know, what the Doctor's expecting of the justice system. Honestly, he's probably not even thinking about it. He just says, "Oh yeah, let the human justice system take care of him. I'm sure it'll just work out fine."
The Fifth Doctor has always had sort of a very much a strong view of equality. So I suspect that he has an idealized. I definitely believe he probably has an idealized viewpoint on what justice would be like on Earth. Because theoretically, in the Doctor's opinion, no matter if you're rich or poor, come from a rich family or poor family, the justice would be equivalent. And naturally, we know that that's not the case at all.
Yeah, and furthermore, for what crime exactly? Because he attacked an Ice Warrior, which is a non-human. I doubt there would be any laws on the books that it's criminal act to attack a non-human entity.
No, technically, there's laws against animal cruelty. No, I don't think the Ice Warriors would take kindly to being compared to animals. But
yeah, I don't even honestly apply to that. Any good lawyer would probably be able to get off. Oh no, they weren't animals; they were armed warriors.
They were Ice Warriors.
Oh, that's also true.
Bring them to the court of justice.
Oh, it's actually, if I'm not mistaken, the Doctor uses the term, and then the Ice Warrior goes, I forget exactly how he phrased it, but it was kind of like an offensive term because they just prefer being called Mousens. So I thought that was pretty funny. At least then the Doctor apologizes.
Oh, yeah. There's also a small reference, and I thought this was interesting. It didn't play a large part in the story, but this is a reference, and I think it's the first episode, to the Brookings report.
Yeah, it was set up, and we don't even get the pair for this set until episode 4, which is always fun when they do that. But so we see Captain Forbes talking to another woman who he did at Manson, and if you listen to the story, you'll find out why. We're just talking to another woman right as they discover the building, the Ice Warriors. Well, they don't know the Ice Warriors are in it yet, but it's an obvious building. It's not a natural occurring thing. The creationists should laugh at. And
I was going to say Matt Dillahanty might have some words for you.
Yeah, but but then he just asks if she's ever read the Brookings report, and then the scene cuts, and then something else happens in the first episode, which is which you don't realize at the time, but it's because of that conversation they had. So it's just fun all around.
And like James said, they talk about it a bit more in the last episode. But what's interesting to me is that the Brookings report is an actual real thing. Now, admittedly, I didn't know about it because I'm not some conspiracy theorist guy. But it's a 1960 report that was commissioned by NASA and created by the Brookings Institute, which some people might know if they're into maybe political science. I'm not sure if people outside of political science would really know the Brookings Institute.
I would expect that.
Yeah, I would think so. But it was just a report from the 1960s. Well, it's about a lot of things. The full name of the report, though, I should read. The proposed studies on the implications of peaceful space activities for human affairs. But most people just shorten that to Brookings report because it's easy.
Yeah, I would expect it is easy.
But it's like 250 pages or so. And there's a portion of the report that goes into what happens if astronauts find what seems to be like an alien civilization. And actually, that's where my reference to conspiracy theorists earlier, part of the report says that if it might be wildly upsetting to culture and society as we know it, that maybe we should withhold any evidence of extraterrestrial life. Some people out there believe that we have run across aliens and the governments are just hiding it because of this type of report.
I mean,
Not
honestly, honestly, they'd probably hide it anyway if they could.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, it's a 250-page report. It says a lot of things. But when most people talk about the Brookings report, they're generally talking about that specific section of the report, which I think is sort of interesting. And again, I didn't know it was a real thing until I looked into it. So I appreciate them bringing something like that into a story. Even like a story like this, I probably didn't even need it. It just adds some extra depth.
Yeah, add some extra depth, some extra mystery. Because in the back of my mind, I was always remembering the conversation about that mentioned the Brookings report. They're like, oh, it's funny because if I'd actually known what it was, then it would have not spoiled anything, but it would have made something a bit more obvious from the beginning. But I guess that's true for a lot of things. The more like background knowledge you have of a certain thing, so I'm sure it'll be easier to understand than others.
Like if we had known a thing about English history during the Marian conspiracy, we might have been able to see where some things are going easier.
This is true, and you would have had to read for like 20 minutes about what was what was going on at that time.
Those are good times. But yeah, we mentioned earlier there's a character Tanya Webster, who is the cousin of Paul Webster. And yeah, she's the 17-year-old geologist who was sent along with them on this expedition. And this is one of those big Finnish cases where there's a little more to this character than what initially meets the eye. I mean, we've seen this type of thing in multiple big Finnish stories.
And probably all of them so far, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, some that come to mind, Whispers of Terror, which was, again, written by Justin Richards, as this one was, and in The Genocide Machine. There's always a character where there's just something going on with them. Another really good example being Phantasmagoria. That one actually might be the most surprising.
Even the very first one, The Signs of Time.
Yeah, though I called that before it happened, so good times.
You did, but I think I helped.
So yeah, she's not a particularly memorable character in my opinion. And to be honest, even though she's voiced by Georgia Moffat, I can't say I recognize the voice. I mean, I would only know her from the Doctor's daughter playing Johnny. And I don't exactly have Johnny's voice ingrained in my mind. And it's not like her character was particularly generic in that story anyway. So I may not recognize the voice and the character may not be that memorable here, but I do like the little element going on with Tanya's character. Like we said throughout, it has a very sort of easygoing feel to it. It feels like they could have done a 4-part story with Peter Davison doing this plot back then. But at the end of this story, Peri and the Doctor are talking. Peri wants to go someplace, maybe with a beach or with flowers. Did she say that she's like a botany person?
Right, she said that at the beginning of the story, yes.
Yeah. So she wants to go someplace maybe a bit nicer that's not negative 100 degrees outside.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure Peri cared much for it. And the Doctor says something along the lines of, well, let's go back to the TARDIS and then we shall see. And it just sounds like one of those lines, like how they would end a classic Who story leading into the next adventure coming up. And that's one of the reasons I think this feels sort of like a cozy time. It feels like it could easily be a Fifth Doctor story you're just watching on screen. It just has the atmosphere to it. Though admittedly, I would say I'm not sure that they really used Peri quite as much as they could have. I'm not sure how much she really added to the story.
No, Peri wasn't really up to much in this one, honestly. Like, yeah, she was a hostage for a bit of the insane guy.
Yeah, and Nicola Bryant's always nice to hear. I just think she plays off the Sixth Doctor certainly more noticeably than she does the Fifth Doctor. Now, it's partially because we haven't seen her interact much with the Fifth Doctor, as James said. She's only in 2 stories, Planet of Fire and Case of Androzani, and half the time during Planet of Fire, she's ran away from the Master. She probably talks more to Chameleon in Planet of Fire than she does the Doctor.
And not many people can say that.
So she just doesn't have the repertoire that she does with the Sixth Doctor, so that might be part of it. But like James said, there are other stories with the Fifth Doctor and Peri, so hopefully some of the conversational skills pick up a bit.
I think it actually helps. Maybe that's why they added the other companion in. Because like I said, they add another companion with all the other Peri Fifth Doctor stories. So
yeah, and it makes sense too, because naturally, if you've seen Fifth Doctor Classic Who, a lot of them have more than one companion. He doesn't usually travel with just one companion. He did a bit toward the end. That's where he gets stories like Phantasmagoria with just Torlo, and there's a portion during the middle when he's traveling with just Nyssa. But generally, he has a handful of companions on him, which, again, for his character sort of works.
It does, and that's how much it really fits in with the Doctor saying as he's flying the plane in the case of Androzani, he barely knows the woman he's trying to save, being Peri, but I'm sure he meant in a more metaphorical sense, where I know her from multiple audio stories that haven't been recorded yet.
Yeah, that's one, I guess, mild concern, because Case of Androzani does have that line. He's attempting to save Peri's life, and he has a line now how he barely knows her. And it makes sense in context of what we've seen from Doctor Who up to that point, because he just met her in Planet of Fire, very next to his Case of Androzani. So sure, he barely knows her there, but given all the Big Finish audios, like James said, there's at least 8 or 9, probably more, but there's at least 8 or 9. So he spent a decent amount of time with her if you combine all those in, and then who's to say what books also get added in. So he should know her at least as well as he knows Tegan. Like, there's no reason why he shouldn't.
Yeah, but of course, they can predict the future at the time, and they probably didn't have any idea that at some point down the line, there'll be people filling in any extra space they could, or maybe even couldn't find between stories.
Yeah, so. I guess that's my main point. I would hope that people, keeping that line in mind, would they have too many stories in between Planet of Fire and Case of Andrews, and ideally keep it down to like maybe 6 at most. But even that, in my opinion, sort of portion it a bit. But trying to keep, I guess, things in line with what we know from Classic Who. Now, that's not to say these other stories won't be perfectly fine, because it's possible that they might be quite enjoyable.
But they might not have the cohesiveness if you watch them all together, which God forbid if you try to watch all Doctor Who media all together. Like trying to fit in the extended media, in personal timelines.
That's actually what they call a good segue.
It is indeed a good segue, but that would be a lot of work. And speaking of a lot of work, the people who work on the TARDIS Wiki personal timelines. As listeners of the podcast will know, the TARDIS Wiki has a personal timeline for each of the main Doctors, and really anything else. Daleks, different species, Torchwood, Members of Torchwood, really anything. This includes not only the classic series and the new Who, but the extensive expanded media from the books, from the comic books, from the comic strips, from Big Finish, and even the BBC audios, which apparently were a thing. And really everything in between, because there were like 5 or 6 different main book ranges alone, let alone all the various other types of books. Doctor Who canon, like in totality, is a mess. So I think it's just fun to take a look at where the stories we talk about fit in into the vast range of media out there. Now, this story, as we've mentioned a few times already, it takes place in between Planet of Fire and the Case of Androzani, the last 2 stories of Peter Davison in Doctor Who, before we get the glorious Trindalama. Great stuff there. But in the extended media, it's a bit more complicated than that. Now, I don't generally bring up the various random short stories because there's, I think 28 short trips books from both Big Finish and BBC, and no one's going to know a random short story from those. But this takes place in between the Ultimate Treasure from BBC Past Doctor Advances in 1997, which was the BBC version of Missing Adventures, which is what it was called under the Virgin books. And so, of course, it takes place in between, so it's telling the 5th Doctor and Peri. And after this, after a couple of short stories, there's Superior Beings from the same book range at BBC Past Doctor Advancers, and that's from 2001, so a few years later. I don't know if they did, but they usually could have even mentioned this story in it since it came out a year after this one was published. They probably didn't, but they easily could have. And I know that some of the books have done that before, rather than Big Finish things.
Yeah, I think we talked about it last time in Genocide Machine, when the advance of Genocide Machine was referenced by Ace in whatever book it happened to be, which I think is sort of fun.
Yeah, it's just a nice connective tissue that you might not expect. Especially if you just read the book and you see the reference, and you might think it's just to something that, just, one of those random things that's mentioned that...
What is it called? It's like noodle events?
Yeah, so like a TV trip is probably called a noodle event.
Oh, I think noodle incident might be.
Yeah, noodle incident. That's it. But, actually could, be relating to something that's actually a whole story that you don't even know about. So that's the glories of the expanded, universe. Well, overall, I thought this one, we said it before, it was a pretty easygoing story. it's not the most complicated, it's not the most interesting in, all of its aspects. A couple of the characters were a bit boring, a bit predictable, but, on the whole, I think it helps that it's a Fifth Doctor story, because if this is any other, and this might actually be damning with faint praise, but if there's any other story for any of the Doctor, it would even be worth a mention. But because it's a Fifth Doctor story, because it just fits with his nature as a Doctor, it also, helps that the Ice Warriors being all honorable also fits with the Fifth Doctor, who is big into fair play. I think it works out better than, honestly, I had any right to this story for me.
Yeah, like James said, I think it's a well-suited story for this specific Doctor. I also think it makes sense to pair up the Ice Warriors with the Fifth Doctor. Much like the Ice Warriors, the Doctor has what you could call honor. And to be fair, most versions of the Doctors have a pretty strong sense of morality, sense of honor. But I think it's strongest among the strongest with the Fifth Doctor. Like, I don't usually think about honor and then think, oh, Sylvester McCoy.
Yeah, I don't know about Sylvester McCoy's honor system.
Yeah. But I think it works. I think the story is well suited for the Fifth Doctor. It has, well, like I said, it has that sort of atmosphere going forward. Now, I don't think the story is particularly amazing, in my opinion. I think it's a decent story, but I don't think it's a particularly great story. Actually, I'll probably, now, luckily we're not ranking any of these, but I'll probably say out of the 8 Big Finish releases we've listened to so far, this will probably, for me, be on the bottom half, so the bottom 4, which, again, it's not saying anything particularly negative about this story. It's just that this story didn't do quite as much for me as some previous stories have done. Naturally, I think it was great to see the Ice Warriors. And actually, on that note, the Ice Warriors have popped up a couple of times in modern New Who. You have Cold War, which is a Matt Smith story, which I don't remember a thing about. And there was also Empress of Mars, which was a Series 10 Peter Capaldi story, which I do remember a couple of things about.
And it wasn't terribly great, except for a really fun appearance at the end of the episode.
Yeah, that was, I think, probably one of the more average episodes of that season, to be sure.
I did like the season as much as you, so I thought a lot of it was average.
It doesn't help that Empress of Mars came out like right around the same time Eaters of Light did. Like, you have 2 pretty generic stories back to back, and that always hurts, especially toward the end of the series too.
Yeah, it does, especially lower excitement for the finale. But that actually had a pretty good finale, so I guess it worked out in the end.
Yeah, I mean, so it's nice seeing the Ice Warriors here, and I think they work with the Fifth Doctor. The Fifth Doctor and Peri, it's an interesting combination. I think they need to work a bit on what to do with them. I've said before that Peri is among one of my favorite companions, and I really like her relationship with the Sixth Doctor. But this one just felt a bit sort of flat almost. And I'm hoping, like I said, they can maybe expand a bit on that in the future. And I'm sure they do.
Yeah, well, that's probably what the other companion is going to help with when it comes to the Fifth Doctor stories.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see where that personality comes into. And I believe their companion's name, we haven't really named them. I believe it's Ormin, something along those lines. I may not be pronounced exactly right.
Yeah, I was waiting until I actually heard it pronounced before I tried to pronounce it. I don't come from Egypt, so I don't want to say a name. I don't want to completely butcher a name of somebody.
But yeah, I would say that Ra Down is a decent story, not particularly great. But if you want some Ice Warrior goldness, we've said before, these are pretty cheap. It's probably just around $3.60. Might be worth checking out.
Yeah, and I think because of the Doctor, the story works out better than this, and you're right too. I mean, you won't probably love the story, but there are some like poignant moments, especially in the last part. The last scene with Lord Zal is pretty good, and I think it just works. It works as much as it needs to work, I would say. So, what's the next thing we are to be discussing, Michael?
Yeah, we are going back to the days of classic Who, talking about perhaps among one of the most well-known Patrick Troughton stories, Second Doctor, of course.
The Mind Robber?
That one has gotten a lot of quality reaction in the recent years. And God, do I want to see the Mind Robber again. But I was actually talking about Tomb of the Cybermen, which is a story that we've seen. I would say that we've seen it at least 3 times, but it has been quite a while since we've last seen it. And we've never actually watched it. We have a special edition DVD, which replaced I don't know when the other DVD came out, but as a kid, say old as fuck. Like, we've had that DVD for years. So it'd be nice to watch it on a nice fresh DVD.
It will be indeed. I mean, I like the Cybermen a lot. I don't know how much Doctor Who ever does with the Cybermen. Like that actually uses the motif well, but I do like the aesthetic. I've always found him a very fun person to watch on screen. So I look forward to seeing that one again, especially since it's Patrick Troughton as well.
Yeah, Patrick Troughton is one of our favorite actors. Cyberman, among like the most well-known antagonists out there, Cyberman's among one of my favorite antagonistic forces. And well, Tomb of Cyberman's a classic. I imagine it's going to stand up, but hey, that's one of the reasons why we're watching it. We will see. So,
Yeah, you might have another Mask of Mandragora situation.
oh boy, I can't imagine. I can't imagine that. But hey, it's always possible. But yeah, also I've used Raw Down. If you've seen it, want to share your thoughts on it or your thoughts on any Big Finish thing, by all means, you can leave a comment. You follow us on Twitter at Brothers Mahoney. That was probably a good way to reach out to us. But yeah, we hope you enjoyed. As always, with the Brothers Mahoney, I'm Michael.
And I'm James.
And have yourself a pleasant day.
And enjoy the Raw Down.